This lesson is so significant because this provides a support to whatever claim you present in your research paper. You and the grade 12 students are going through this point now. It's just that you don't follow the same format, especially that the grade 12 students have been inclined into doing experimental researches, while your research are qualitative in nature. Still, whatever the nature of the research may be, you will still have to rely on some literature or studies, related literature or related studies, to guide you in the making of your research paper. In fact, a good research paper can actually be anchored on a good or strong foundation provided by literatures. What do we mean by literatures here? Literatures pertain to materials, references, readings that you have tapped into in order to complete the making of your research paper. Without these literatures, you can't really say, yes, allow me to be honest with this. Without these literatures, you can't really say that your work, even if you've finished making it, is a good one. So we do a literature review. We review the literature. A literature review surveys books, scholarly articles, and other sources relevant to the particular issue, area of research, or theory, and by so doing provides a description, summary, and critical evaluation of these works in relation to the research problem being investigated. This brings you back to this brings us back to the rationale of your research work, the rationale that you submitted in the performance task. What's to be found in the rationale? The problem. What problem are you trying to address? What problem are you trying to respond to? Even if these problems are products of your observation, without a good support, the world of research would not acknowledge such a problem to be existent. Even if you'd say, sir, it's obvious, sir, that there are teenage parents in the community right now. Yes, observations would tell you that that's obvious. And so what's the problem behind it? So the problem is they're not ready. What told you that they're not ready? Because I have a friend, sir, who is not ready in becoming a teenage parent. Your friend is just a singled out member of the entire population. Why will you make that friend of yours speak in behalf of the entire population? This is where these literatures will come in to support the problem that you have identified. If you look at the copy that I provided there, I have defined academic performance. And of course, I have obvious observations of what academic performance is. But will research acknowledge my words? Will the world of research acknowledge my words, my opinions? No. I have to rely on some authority or proponent out there, some writer out there, to support the concept of academic performance that I'm trying to dwell on in my research paper. If I didn't do that, then surely people can just ignore that concept of academic performance that I'm introducing. For instance, what's your study, Sher?
About music, sir, and how it motivates students to do better in their
That one, oh, music and how it motivates students to do better in school or in their academics. Even if Sher would say, sir, because it's quite observable already, sir, that there are people who get motivated to study more if they listen to good music. The follow-up always comes. Who told you that such concern really exists? Unless Sher would say, it's because, sir, according to EHERA 2012, or according to EHERA 2020, he was able to prove that good academic performance comes from having a good choice of music to listen to. If Sher adds that to her claim, then that really supports the need to conduct the study. Sher now is now relying on the opinion, not on opinion, on the expert of what that expert just gave as an idea towards the problem that Sher wants to study. Again, we have to face the fact the world of research could care less about us. As of today, as of this time, we have not established our credibility yet as researchers. To establish slowly our being credible researchers, we as of this time will have to lean on some literature. So, now that I've told you this, hopefully the rationale that you've submitted to me will be changed or edited. The rationale that you've also submitted me as performance tasks is on an individual submission, right? You submitted one to represent not your pair, but yourself. That's for an individual submission or requirement. This time, when you complete the rationale or when you arrive at the finished or edited version of your rationale, work as a pair. Work on your groups now. Explore how you can actually develop or improve the rationale that you've just made. Provide authorities, citations. However, do not also flood your rationale with so many authorities. Let's be reminded, the rationale presents the perspective of the researcher of what the problem is. You just need an authority to support that the problem really exists, that such an issue is really there. That's why you cite authorities, you cite writers, you cite experts, but you do not flood the rationale with citations or authorities. Do not make it appear as though that rationale is not anymore a reflection of you, researchers. Next, what are the features of a good literature review? First, it could give you a new interpretation of old materials or combine new with old interpretations. It traces the intellectual progression of the study. It evaluates the sources and advises the reader of the research on the most pertinent and relevant research. And lastly, in the conclusion usually of a literature review, it identifies where gaps exist in how a problem has been researched to date. When you talk of gaps, that's one reason why replications can be done in research. Related studies provide gaps. And these are the gaps that researchers would like to fill in. By looking at the gap of a literature or a related study, then researchers will be given an idea of how they can improve the literature that they have just read. A literature review allows you to do 5 things. Allows you to define and limit a problem. It also places your study in perspective. It avoids unintentional replication of previous studies. Unintentional, meaning when you do replications now, it is intentionally done because you will have read and known and studied the gap in that literature. And by your choice, you are going to really fill in that gap. A good literature review allows you to also select methods and measures. And lastly, it relates findings to previous knowledge and suggests areas for further research. In the format that you'll do, and the format that you'll have for this subject, you are going to use literature to support the results of your study. So there'll be a part in your research paper which is composed mainly of literatures. Literatures which talk of related researches, theories, laws, legal basis. Sorry. All of these account as literatures. And you will use at least one of them to support whatever findings you arrive at after having obtained all of your data. And aside from that, a literature review allows you to select good methods and measures. The grade 12 students have been highly recommended to do this. And so I'd like to recommend the same to you. If you do not know the exact procedures to do in your research, I suggest you read previous researches. For instance, Sean, your topic again is procrastination, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Assuming that Sean's pair, who's your pair, Sean?
Edson, sir.
Edson. You and Edson are not yet fully sure of what method to use to obtain your data. You might want to explore the idea of reading researches that try to evaluate procrastination. And then, by the time the pair of Sean and Edson finds a good method, they might eventually decide, okay, this method works well for us as well, works well for our research. Let's try to use this. But of course, Sean and Edson should not forget to acknowledge through a citation the person or research from where they got adapted their method. See? Literature reviews allow or give you chances to identify the correct method or measure to use in gathering your data. A typical research literature includes the following. So you can have journals, thesis and dissertations, conference proceedings, books, and textbooks. Actually, these things, you might have noticed the internet has not been mentioned. If you look at the copy of the module, for the typical research literature, included in the typical research literature, you cannot find their internet sources, websites. They're not there. Why? Research gives more importance to printed materials. That's a truth. Because before a material gets published, before it gets fully printed for publication, that material, especially if it's a research work, that material is being examined thoroughly by peers or a group of experts in that particular area or field of specialization. Like if you're doing research related to psychology, your work will have to be examined by people who share the same field as you do. And once you get their approval, they say that the content is correct, that's when the publication process continues. So there is quite an assurance that that printed material or printed reference has good content compared to internet sources. What's the problem with an internet source? I'd like to ask Lucia, what's the issue regarding internet sources?
There might be things not true.
Correct. You can't be ascertained of how true all those information are that you can find online. Even if the presentation is quite long and informative or academic, you can't still get the assurance of how true these statements really are, these claims actually are, compared to how printed materials do it. If it were in a printed material, rest assured, there is a higher degree of truthfulness behind the ideas in that printed material. Yes, Josh, it's all right, Josh. Journals. We go with journals. These are issues. These are published in issues at regular intervals. And then you can have research journals and professional journals. Research journals are published by peer-reviewed articles, are published peer-reviewed articles. So these are researches that are being published and are being compiled. No, this is not a research journal. Professional journals are those that pertain to professional issues, service developments, and others. You have theses and dissertations. When people proceed to taking their postgraduate studies, or when they just want to do a research study of something new or of something else, they might want to do for a higher degree at a university or at an academic institution, they might want to do a thesis or a dissertation. Usually, the dissertation takes longer time because dissertations are trying to establish a theory and they want to prove that theory to be applicable to a particular moment, to a particular group, or to a particular locality or community. That is why they take longer than the thesis. Conference proceedings. These are brief summaries of research works presented at conferences. Then you have books and textbooks. Of course, books and textbooks serve as good materials. Here are samples of research proceedings. Look, these are research proceedings. This one is in this one is a copy from Dapitan. This happened in 2018. This one is from 2019 for research proceedings that took place in Palawan. I had students before whom I accompanied to attend this National Students Research Conference, and their abstracts have already been printed here. Lucky for these students, they already have publications under their name because this counts as a student publication already, not a professional publication. This counts as a student publication. It even has, each copy has its own ISSN number or ISSN. It's like a registry number for published student works. So these are samples of research proceedings or conference proceedings. And when you flip open any of these pages, you'll find, like, let's have a sample. Like this. You'll find there the title of the study. Then you can also find the authors. This area is the abstract. As said, the conference proceedings contain brief summaries. So we are pertaining, of course, to the abstracts of the many researches that are found here. This was actually the goal last year for the batch of RISA with their PR2, but because of COVID or that NSRC has not also sent a communique this year, NSRC will have probably canceled it because of the pandemic. But who knows, if they decide to bring it back, then we can submit your abstracts and we'll see what, anyway, the submission of the abstract is free. They'll just have to examine it, and if it passes through their standards, they'll publish your work in a conference proceeding. Then you have categories according to Wallace and Ray 2006. There are categories to classify literatures students encounter. We begin with a theoretical literature. You also have a research literature. Empirical research is also there. Practice literature is another category. And you have a policy literature. Theoretical literature describes expected or anticipated relationships about the way things happen, especially on how a theory comes to be applicable to a particular circumstance. Research literature generally refers to a report of systematic investigation undertaken in response to the need to answer a specific question. Empirical research is under observation and measurement of the world around us. It's a kind of literature that relies so much on observation, experience, or experimentation to collect new data. There's practice literature, a kind of literature particular to an area of expertise, as it comes from experts' opinions, discussion papers, debate, information from websites, but most importantly, relevant to a particular area of expertise. Then policy literature tells practitioners how to act in a set of circumstances. So you have there a giving of policies and guidelines, which could be written from a local or national perspective, and in some cases in an international context. Of course, it's highly possible that what you'll find could be how do you call this? Could fall into any of the a combination of these categories. Like for instance, if the research paper that I have just shared to you, the one in Edmodo, my research work in college, counts as empirical research and research literature. You can put it there. Steps to help students with the literature review. First, you develop a systematic approach to searching for literature. When you talk about that systematic searching strategy, first thing that you'll have to do is to look for the type of literature that will address the review question. This is the first one that you should do. Second, create search terms that are valid and important to the search. Third, use inclusion and exclusion criteria. Samples are there below. Search for literature using the search terms through all relevant databases. And the last one is to fill in the electronic search by looking for the frequently cited journals as well as the reference list of the journal articles. When we talk about search terms, one week practice, allow me to also share this, a week practice that students did was to just type in a variable. For instance, the topic on, what's your study? What's the complete title, name of the topic, Sean?
Sir. Procrastination, the effects, and sorry, the effects of I forgot.
Effects and reasons.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Effects and reasons of procrastination, oh?
yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. By the time, if I were Sean and I'm going to search for literature online, because though online information can really be challenged in terms of their uh, content and truthfulness, the most practical one that we can attend to would be to look for them online, to look for online resources instead. If I were Sean, I'd go to the search tab and then I will not just type procrastination. Procrastination is a key term, correct? It's a key term. But is it a good key term to stand for itself? No. This is where Sean will come in with researches about effects of procrastination. Filipino authored researches about reasons why students procrastinate. Why will Sean go as far as Filipino authored researches? Because the context or the people involved in the study of Sean are Filipinos. Take note, the case of Filipinos might be different from those of other nations. If you rely so much on Western authored literature, then such content might not be totally applicable to this context, to the context where you are pulling out your participants. So one key term there would be Filipino researches. Filipino researches about procrastination. Filipino authored researches about procrastination. Filipino authored researches on the reasons to procrastinate. If Sean just simply puts in procrastination, researches on procrastination, that's not strong enough. So like what I said earlier, that's a weak practice. And once you have identified all of these literature, you will then have to review the question for that set of literatures to match what questions you wanted to address. That is why it is really important that as of this time, you continue polishing your research questions. Look at, if you have noticed by now, we have really gone and we have really invested so much focus on the research questions of your studies. By arriving at good research questions, look at what happens. You'll be able to know the correct literature significant to your work. By arriving at a good research question or by having the correct research questions, you'll know what data you should try to team out later on. You would know what concerns you'd like to point out by the time you conduct these interviews with your participants. Questions so far? Learning from others and reviewing the literature. Questions? If do we have some questions? If there's none, I will now end the recording and I'll spend the rest of the time making a follow-up with your researches.